Hello, everyone. Welcome to Consider the Source with your friend, the Lord of Toxicity. Today, we're going to be talking about the 1998 novel written by Dennis Lehane and turned into a 2007 movie directed by Ben Affleck and starring his baby brother, Casey Affleck. Gone, Baby Gone. Let's get into it.
Consider the source, it's all the same. Truth or twisting adaptations gain. He holds scales, he holds the light. Lord of toxicity will rule the night.
All right. Yes, let's get into this one because this is one of my favorite novels, written by one of my favorite authors of all time, Dennis Lehane. For the uninitiated, Dennis Lehane is a Boston former private investigator turned novelist. He spent a lot of his time doing social work and helping kids out, some of the more unfortunate ones in his area of Dorchester, Massachusetts, and South Boston. He later became a private investigator, and then even later still became a novelist. Some of the books that he has written, you'd be very surprised to know, to include but not limited to Shutter Island, Live by Night, Gone Baby Gone, which we're going to be talking about today, The Drop, which is very underrated and underappreciated, and probably the greatest of those is Mystic River, which was also turned into a film in 2003 from his 2000 novel, which I have also done a Consider the Source review, book versus film on, and I will leave a link to that in the copy or in the description of this video today. So Gone Baby Gone is one of my favorite novels. It's one of my favorite movies. I can't even describe to you how many times I have seen this movie and read the book. I don't know why it doesn't get more attention in the pantheon that is the South Boston crime thrillers. You know, movies like The Town, The Departed, you know, they get a lot of attention, and as well they should. But Dennis Lehane really knows this stuff, and a lot of the things that have he's put forth out in that have become movies and TV shows or script doctoring, a lot of that stuff doesn't get as much as attention as it should. Obviously, Shutter Island is something that's going to garner a lot of attention because it has that psycho supernatural element to it, and of course Leonardo DiCaprio, and it's a great adaptation. Most of his stuff has been really well adapted. I think maybe the least of which might be The Drop, and even I would argue even that's pretty damn good. So anyway, there's a whole series that he does based on a character called Patrick Kenzie, which is obviously a self-insert for Dennis Lehane because he is a smart-ass Boston Catholic private investigator. And Patrick Kenzie works with his longtime love affair partner and later wife, Angie Gennaro, and the two of them are a little unorthodox, but still very competent private detectives working out of a church belfry in South Boston near Dorchester. So Gone Baby Gone is like the fifth or sixth book in the Gennaro Kenzie series that lasts like 7 or 8 novels. It's the only one so far that has been adapted to the big screen or to TV, to anything. And I think that's really unfortunate because it's one of the ones that, even though it's got great subject material, had I been in charge of it, I would have made it some kind of a TV show and had this just be a big chapter in it. I think it lends itself to the Source, where it could have been something as good as Justified or Sons of Anarchy or something like that. One of those things that, you know, it should be on an awesome cable series, or like maybe FX's The Shield or something like that. But anyway, so Gone Baby Gone is what we're talking about today. It's a 1998 novel. It got adapted about 10 years later. And one of the things that the movie does right off the bat different than the book. The book opens up in third person narrative, talking about a character named Rachel hanging out on the Texas coast and working at a bar and taking care of a child. This is not explained until the very end of the novel. And it's one of the things that I have a big gripe about the novel, but there's more. And keep in mind, this is one of my favorite of his books. It might even be my favorite one, although A Drink Before the War, the first Kenzie Gennaro novel, is really, really good as well. But juxtapose that against the film, whereas in the film, Patrick himself, played in the film by Casey Affleck, Ben Affleck's younger brother, he does a narrative with a long screenshot of different sectors of the Dorchester kind of double-decker home hood type thing. You know, you got a lot of lower middle class people living in that area, but they have a good kind of family-oriented environment, despite the fact that there's crimes and drugs, as there are in any big city. Patrick and his wife Angie at this point in the narrative are still working as private detectives, but they are together. For the first several novels, I'll let you know they are not together. They are just kind of on again, will they, won't they, off again type situation going on, and she's actually married at one point. Angie is. So in the novel and in the film, early on, Patrick and his wife Angie are approached by B and Lionel McCready. B and Lionel are the aunt and uncle of young Amanda McCready, who has been missing for at least a few days at the point where the narrative starts, both in the film and the book. One of the things that is consistent along this is how much the aunt and uncle actually care about Amanda and want to get her back. Put that up against the mom, Helene, who is basically a toxic drug addict, part-time prostitute, terrible mother who could care less what happens with her daughter until the daughter's actually kidnapped. She's played to perfection by Amy Ryan in the film, and I think she comes off a lot better in the film than she does in the book. But we'll get to that. We'll get there. Anyway, a lot of the characters I really have no singular complaint against, and as I flesh this out a little bit, you'll kind of understand why I have such a love for these characters and what they do, and why I'm so glad a movie like this was able to represent them in such a great way. Like I said, Amy Smart playing the mother, Helene, she has misplaced her kid, meaning to say that someone's either walked off with her or she walked off on her own, but she's been gone for a few days. Did Helene do something to the kid? Did one of her drug associates do something to the kid? Did the kid get kidnapped, run off, and then something happened to her? Nobody really knows, but she's a toddler age, so she couldn't have gone off to Vegas. Everybody knows that. Patrick and his wife, Angie, don't really want to take this job. As it says in the book, and as they kind of allude to in the film as well, you know, after a few days, the chances of finding a little kid is questionable at best. At that point, unfortunately, you're usually just looking for a body. Patrick knows this, and he doesn't really want to get involved. That's where we start to have some differences between the source material and the adaptation, which is the movie. In the novel, Patrick doesn't want to do it. He's not interested. And really, to most degree, Angie doesn't either. In the film, Angie really doesn't want to do it. And Patrick's, he's kind of willing to give it a shot. Right here we have Morgan Freeman. He plays Captain Doyle, which is the head of like a special task force in Boston that searches for lost, missing, abused, and or kidnapped children. In the novel, he is a white guy and he's a lieutenant, but that's really the only difference. And I think we can all agree, if they do a race swap character and it's Morgan Freeman, I think no matter what the situation is, I think it's okay. I think we're fine with that. Why they made him a captain instead of a lieutenant, I don't really see that as a big deal. I'm not really sure what the significance of that is, but maybe they just thought he had a little bit more gravitas as a captain. The characters are basically the same. Most of the people that are the main characters and even the side characters in this adaptation, they don't change all that much. They might be slightly more fleshed out in the novel. Specifically, Angie's character. Up to this point in the book series, Angie's a very, very complicated character, and Michelle Monaghan plays her very well. She's very attractive, and she's a great actress. I don't have any kind of an issue with the way that she plays it, or what she does with the material. They just don't give her that much to do. But to be fair, in this particular novel of Gone Baby Gone, she doesn't really stand out as much. There's some kind of cosmetic differences between what it is that you would think Angie would look like and what she actually does. And I actually had a different actress in mind when I read the book. But that being said, I think she does a very competent job. If the worst that I could say about this is that, Michelle Monaghan isn't quite what I think of when I think of Angie Gennaro, then that's quite a small nitpick with that. This character is their buddy Bubba. Bubba is a drug dealer and gun runner, more heavy on the drug dealer in the film than he is in the book. In the book, he tends to be this kind of, I don't know how to describe, like a big monstrosity, and he kind of is as much in the film as well. Some people recognize he's one of the heist members from The Town, another film by Ben Affleck, but not written by Dennis Lehane. He is a childhood friend of Angie and Patrick. He was out on the street and they brought him food and hung out with him, and then later he kind of adopted them as like a older brother type of thing. Sort of played to the same thing in here. In the other novels, he's fleshed out more with a lot more to do, and in this one, he doesn't have as much to do, but he is around. It's sort of the same thing in this particular novel. A lot of the side characters in this novel don't stand out as much as they do in the other novels. That's really hard for me to describe. You'd have to kind of get into it and read the series of novels to kind of understand what I'm saying with that. But this guy, he's some kind of white Irish rapper. He does a great job. It's not worth me looking up his name because he hasn't really done that much. But he does a good job, and I have no problem with what he does in the film as opposed to the book. This is an interesting character. This is Cheese Olimon, which is one of the main, I guess you'd call him an antagonist, but he's a local drug dealer and pimp, kind of sideline guy to Bubba. In the novel, he's a pasty albino type character who I think is a foreigner, but I'm not sure. And in the movie, they made him a Haitian drug dealer. I think that was a better choice. And I don't think it is a DEI race swap type thing. This is 2007 after all. But I think it's one of those things that just plays better. I don't know the name of this actor, but he's one of the guys. He's popped up in Justified before, and I think in Bosch. He's a great character actor, and when he pops up, he always elevates the stuff that he's in, and he plays a good role. And I think it plays better with him being this Haitian drug dealer, pimp type guy. So the story goes that Amanda McCready's mom, Helene, is into this guy Cheese for some money. Her and her boyfriend Ray Lekansky have been running drugs for him. They run afoul of some state troopers and tell him that the troopers got the money and the drugs, when in reality they took the drugs and the money, and basically they're worried that he found out about it, ergo he kidnapped Amanda until he could get the money back. And quite frankly, that's what Patrick and his wife start to believe, and that is the most plausible thing. But it happens so early on in the film that you're sort of, you're like, there's no way it's that easy. On top of that, I have to score 1 for the book with that because it is expanded out longer. So it's one of those things that they kind of fall into through the course of the investigation, doing, the usual PI type stuff, working with the cops, getting information, talking to suspects, talking to informants. And that's when they kind of stumble upon that. So moving forward for the rest of the film, this is your spoiler warning. I'm going to be showing clips and talking about very specific points because there is a big twist to this film. Be advised. Here's my copyright disclaimer for any of the clips that I use. YouTube, don't come after me. I'll use them as fairly as I possibly can. Yes, YouTube, this means you. Anyway, so the cops and Angie and Patrick all decide that, hey, if something's going on, it's got to be this guy Cheese behind it. Ed Harris plays senior detective Remy Broussard. Remy is a transplant from Louisiana that's been working in Boston. He works for the Children's Crime Unit with his partner, played by John Aston. And the two of them are the two main detectives that are helping out our two protagonist private detectives. And we're going to find out through the course of this story, again, spoiler alert, that the actual kidnapping is not what we think it is. And the cops are actually in on the kidnapping. Da, 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 da. I wanted to show this because over here, if you look to your left, that's Carla Cugino in one of her better roles. I always imagined Carla Cugino in this role. You read this novel and you think of this hot, busty Italian chick that's good with a gun, and Carla Cugino is pretty much who comes into your mind. So just wanted to point that out. I mean, look at that. You really can't go wrong there. Anyway, there's some electrifying performances in this movie. I mean, everybody is really firing on all cylinders. It elevates the material so much at certain points that it's really hard to look away. And some of the stuff, because it's involving children and crimes against children, it really rocks you. You got to be made of some stern stuff, and a lot of it's triggered. I've actually watched this movie with a person who suffered abuse, and then they had to get up and walk out, and they basically walked away in tears because it upset them so much. There's a certain point in time when an adjacent case where another little boy has been kidnapped. Patrick stumbles upon that and has John Aston, who plays Detective Poole, and Ed Harris, who plays Detective Broussard. He calls them in for some help. Him and Bubba have found the child, or at least found where they think the child is. They've gone in, and I can't show it lest the YouTube gods smite me down. But I will say that what follows is a pretty bad and ugly gunfight where not most of the people live through, including the child and including the person that hurt the child, executed on his knees by Patrick in a really badass scene. And I'm going to, as carefully as I can, show this clip for the aftermath of that, because Detective Poole was mortally wounded, and Detective Broussard and Patrick are both discussing the merits of unaliving a child rapist and murderer.
Kids don't judge. Kids turn the other cheek.
Right here, they're outside the hospital, and Ed Harris's character Broussard is trying to tell Kenzie and make him feel better about the fact that, hey, yeah, you did execute a child murderer while he was unarmed and on his hands and knees, but you did the right thing because he hurt a child. Because Ed Harris's character, he don't play that shit.
What do they get for it?
So what follows is a scene in which Ed Harris stunningly admits to, while drunk, and private investigator Patrick Kenzie, played by Casey Affleck, he's explaining to Patrick that at some point in time in the past, he and his partner Poole had gone in on a tip from Ray Lekansky, and remember that because it's going to be important later. And they go after this guy who's been abusing a child and keeping him in this kind of dungeon type existence. And so he plants drugs on the guy.
So I went back out there. I put an ounce of heroin on the living room floor, and I sent the father on a ride.
So this is one of those gray areas they do a lot in film and TV, where it's basically, is it okay to do criminal things to criminals in order to do the ends justify the means? Are you serving a greater good by betraying your oath and doing something horrible to someone who would harm a child? Now, we all have our different moralities in that. Some might say, well, now you're no better than the person that you did it to. Some might say, well, you've only created a bigger problem. And Ed Harris, in fact, he does indeed admit that it's possible that getting the father hooked up on trumped up charges probably may not even have helped the kid.
That was the right thing. Fucking A!
You got to admit that fucking A is probably the best fucking A that's ever been used in in any part of cinema. I'll remind you, as I say in one of my banners down here, that Ed Harris didn't even get nominated for this. Didn't even get a nomination, much less an Oscar for this performance. And I'm sorry that I have to keep pausing it, but I don't want this thing to get yeeted. So please, I implore you, if it's been a while since you've seen this movie, go back and watch the scene again. And if it doesn't give you chills, then I don't know. I got to admit, I got to think something's wrong with you.
You gotta take a side. You molest a child. You beat a child. You're not on my side.
This is the point in which two things happen. One, we know where Broussard stands in all of this. If there's any kind of shenanigans going on with the kiddos, it's definitely not him behind it. He's too drunk and too honest and too worried about his partner who's been wounded and too traumatized from just gunning down a couple of pedophiles to think anything different than, you know, I'm gonna lay my soul to bear to this kid right now. And Patrick is listening. They're both now at this point, they both basically committed murder together. So they're in that way, they're brothers in arms, and they've seen this horrible thing. And again, I can't even describe what happened to the kid in the house. And the director does it in such a way that, even just the quick flashing scenes of what these monsters did to this child, it stays with you a long time after you both read the scene and you watch the scene. I think it's very well done, and I just can't understand why this movie hasn't garnered more praise and more accolades.
If you see me coming, you better run because I'm gonna lay you the fuck down.
Yeah, that's incredible. I wish I could have just played that whole thing without any kind of interruption, but we don't live in that kind of world. But yeah, so it's one of those things where this film asks a lot of questions of your morality. If someone hurts a child, is it okay to hurt them? Later on in the story, through twists and machinations, Patrick realizes that he's been kind of played for a fool this entire time. Both in the book and in the film. He comes to the conclusion in different ways in the source material and the adaptation, but in the ways that count, they're very similar. And he deduces at some point that not only has he been lied to, but this whole thing, Amanda was never missing in the first place, or she was missing from her mother, but she wasn't abducted. She was basically sequestered by the police with Lieutenant Doyle in the book, but he's Captain Doyle in the movie. And they're now taking care of the child and basically contrive this whole thing so that they could steal money in order to give her a good life from the drug dealer. And the main thing to keep her away from Helene, which if, young Amanda stayed with her mom, and their way of their morality, they think that Amanda staying with her mom would almost surely, she'd wind up on the stripper pole, drugged out, abused, or dead. And they've seen too much stuff happening to children. They can't accept that. And we as the audience kind of go along during this, crime procedural, this detective story, and we're kind of put in the same position that a lot of the people that got to make these hard choices are put into. What would you do in this situation? Well, I don't want to go too much on a tangent on that, but I will say this is where we start to get into both heavy similarities and heavy differences between the book and the adaptation, which is the film. So one of the main things is the whole plot, the whole subplot of, who is this person at the beginning of the book? What is their significance to it? Well, we've come to find out that this is actually the wife of Remy Broussard, who is an ex prostitute who he had married, and kind of caused some consternation amongst the police force for him doing so, but because he was such a senior detective, they let it slide. And he is actually killed in a shootout trying to cover up any loose ends at the Murphy's Law pub, which happens both in the film and in the book. The difference being in the film, it's really kind of tapered down. They don't have a lot of extra fat on the scene. So for the book, there's this special state investigator that's gotten involved, and that character is not in the film at all. And that investigator goes to meet with Lionel after he and Patrick have both kind of figured out the cops' involvement in this. Angie is also involved in the shootout, and then there's a secondary cop that's in the unit that Broussard was in, and he kind of goes in there and they do the whole staged robbery thing. Same thing pretty much plays out in the film, but in the film it's just Ed Harris's character Remy Broussard doing it, whereas in the book it's these multiple characters. And that's a really smart idea. You turn something into a film, you don't want to have a bunch of extra characters running around, and you don't want to have a bunch of extra actors that you have to pay as far as that goes. So the shootout happens in the bar. One of the cops is killed immediately. He's killed by Angie. And some words on that really quick. In the books, Angie is the actual gunman of the two. She's the sharp crack shooter. Whereas in the film, you don't even see her carrying a weapon really. But you do see, I think there's like a side picture where you can see her in one scene maybe carrying a pistol. But she's the big pistolero of the group. That's kind of their, subverting expectations thing that they do in the books, which is, she's the crack shot. Patrick's just kind of mediocre when it comes to that. But obviously in the movie, you've got him, he's a swinging dick, got his pistol in his hand through most of the scenes that there's any serious action in, and he's involved in a couple shootouts, including the one I'm talking about now. So Ed Harris's character is mortally wounded. He gives up just a little bit more information, which basically leads Patrick to understand that, Captain Doyle in the movie and Lieutenant Doyle in the book is actually where Amanda is at. He and his wife are holding her. So what follows is a situation in which Patrick finds out where they are. He goes there and tries to kind of de-escalate the situation and get the girl back to where she belongs. And the big crux of it is, is Amanda better off with her mom? I guess the answer to that is probably no, but at the same time, Patrick's stance is this. It's like, hey, you took this little girl from her mom, and whether her mom is a shitty mom or not is kind of irrelevant. What the deal is the fact that, I was hired on to do a job, return this girl to her family, and you're stopping me from doing so. And on top of that, you can't go into a society in which people can just randomly decide to take people from their family. Although those of us who have had problems and run-ins with, child protective services and things like that, some people have been victims of overreaching state and government interaction. But that's a story for another day. Basically, he has the choice to kind of walk away, let little Amanda stay with, Captain Lieutenant Doyle, or turn him in and give her back to her mom. And this is a big watershed moment between Angie and Patrick, both in the book and in the film. And I applaud the film for the fact that, they took that plot point and actually followed through with it, because it's a real messy ending with that, because it basically breaks them up. Angie, she's been in the system herself. She has seen what happens. She's seen what women like Helene will do to their kids unchecked, and she's okay with just, both her character in the movie and in the book, she's okay with just letting the cop keep the little girl. And I can't tell you whether or not that's the right answer or the wrong answer. The answer that is decided on is Patrick decides to go and say, look, I was hired to do this job, and I'm gonna give the kid back for whatever that's worth. And he does so. It breaks them up, and at the end there's a real poignant scene in which he comes in to check on them and finds out that basically Amanda's mom, Helene, is up to her old trick. She's going to go out on a date, and she's going to kind of leave the little one behind. And in the film, he decides to stay and watch her. In the book, he kind of walks off in the distance and kind of lets things play out and gets real melancholy thinking about all the things that he could have done right, could have done wrong, could have done better. And that's basically what happens. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know which ending is better. I mean, if you've read all of the books, I mean, I could certainly make an argument that the ending for the book is better. But if you are a person that likes an ending that kind of has some closure and makes some sense, then you're probably going to be, saying, I prefer the film as far as that goes. I can't tell you which choice I would have made, but what I can do is tell you which thing that I like better. So a few other little nitpicks here and there. I don't think the bookended scene of Broussard's wife is really necessary. I think the novel suffers under the weight of too many characters. There's a lot of places in which the procedural of talking to suspects, doing cool PI shit, undercover work, it kind of suffers under its own weight. And then upon a second or third reading, if you are so inclined to do so, knowing what the big twist is, you see all these hoops that they had to jump through, and you're like, man, these cops were just playing them the whole time, so everything they did was kind of pointless. Whereas the movie's very stripped down, and you can kind of look at it and say, hey, okay, this is, upon repeated viewing, you can catch things that you hadn't caught before. And again, that's down to all of the great performances done by the actors and actresses in this film. So again, I don't have any kind of a problem with what anyone has done in it. Again, a couple characters are race swap, but I don't think it hurts anything with the story. Patrick is a much younger person in the film. And then, that's also down to the fact that Casey Affleck just he looks like he's 21, from both Good Will Hunting up to the movies that he's doing today, unless he has a beard or something. So he still looks super young with that baby face. But he's a good Patrick Kenzie. He's a little bit more debonair in the and a little bit more of a smartass, if you can believe that, in the books than he is in the film. But I think Casey Affleck captures it, and I don't take anything away from Michelle Monaghan. I probably envisioned somebody different, a more Carla Gugino, but it's totally fine. She's great. John Astin and Remy Broussard are pitch perfect in their roles as two detectives. And I'm sorry, Ed Harris as Remy Broussard. Sorry about that. They are great. In the book, Remy's a bit younger, and there's a lot more back and forth between Patrick and Remy. They have a tighter bond, but also more adversarial type things. So it's pretty interesting. I do give it that. But again, it does kind of drag the story down in the book, because you're kind of like, where is this going? What's going on? So if you like a stripped down story, and I think everybody can agree these days that movies tend to be, held down by their own weight. They're over bloated. So a word for word remake of this book would have made a much more bloated film. And I like the stripped down, slick version that we got. And I don't think the story's any less for it. So I'm going to go ahead and side this one, not surprisingly, with the adaptation over the source. And that's where I come out. But I definitely recommend, whether you've read the book or not, see the movie again, maybe read the book again, but definitely watch the movie again. And if you've never read the book, give it a try. And there's a sequel to this called Moonlight Mile, which happens 10 or 15 years later, where we catch up with an adult Amanda and a getting ready to retire Patrick. And it's really, really good. My only small flaw I have with the Kenzie Gennaro books is that they are told in the first person. And anyone that has watched anything on my channel knows I'm not a big first person narrative guy. I don't care for that. It's not how I write, and it's not how I like to read certain things. But I will say, as I've said before, that if you're going to utilize the first person narrative, you could do worse than utilizing a private investigator story. Private investigator stories, thrillers, crime noir, they kind of lend themselves to first person narrative. So, take that for what it is. I want to thank everybody for watching and listening to this. I'd be fascinated to hear what your thoughts are on this great movie and great book. Have you read the book? And if you have, which one do you think did it better? What would you have liked to have seen taken from the book that didn't wind up in the movie? There's not much. It's a pretty faithful adaptation. But if you disagree, let me know. Let me know if you disagree. And what do you want to see next? As usual, I'm going to shill for my one and only published novel that's out right now, although I am working on the sequel. Check out Slapdash. It is on Amazon. You can contact me personally. My contact information is in the description and it's on my channel. And I am more than happy, if you are stateside, to get you a signed copy of Slapdash. If that doesn't tickle your fancy, you can check it out on Kindle. If you have Kindle Unlimited, it is free. Otherwise, you can purchase it for the low price of $3. Or you can get the paperback version, which is in large print, for $15. So it's a steal either way. That said, that's all I've got today for Consider the Source with Gone Baby Gone. I thank you so much for joining me. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know what book you would like to see talked about next. I've got a couple suggestions floating around, but I'm always open to new suggestions. So until next time.
Consider the